Yep.
Great. Well, listen, firstly, welcome to Gardens at the Bay. It's led here by Felix, who actually spent 4 years at Massey University and is also a very proud Kiwi. But, of course, the highlight this morning was actually having a supply chain roundtable, and it was a great chance to talk about two things, really, the crisis, but also over the next 15 years, what can we do to improve our supply chain efficiency and productivity so that we can continue to actually grow our economy and get our exports to market all around the world. So but with that, happy to take any questions you may have.
Can you tell us a little bit about the supply chain conversation this morning? You asked for them to give you some very honest feedback about what the government could do to help that supply chain. What kind of things have they suggested? What things will you work on?
Yeah, look, it was two conversations. First and foremost, we engage with many of the companies that are in that round table and have been since day one. I wanted to be reassured that their products were getting to market, and importantly, they were able to get critical products into New Zealand. We have a dashboard of the critical inputs that are petrochemical related, and we know that there's no impact on any of those supplies at this point in time. So it was very reassuring, products coming into New Zealand and products getting out of New Zealand into market. But the second piece is to say, as business leaders and as political leaders, as we think about 15 years from now, what is it more that we need to do to be able to enable a more efficient, productive supply chain and logistics system in New Zealand? Because we want to be able to continue to grow our economy. You've seen in the last year we've grown our exports by about $12 billion, and we want, for the first time in the last 5 years, we've now got more exports than we've got imports to New Zealand. So we want to continue to grow trade dramatically, and that requires us to make the most of things like the Singapore-New Zealand corridor now. A good example would be the two wharfs that were going to be extended at Auckland Port. We're projected to take anywhere from 3 to 5 years under the RMA. We managed to be able to get the consenting process all locked up within less than 120 days. And so that's been a part of the dialogue that I've had with that community over the last year or so. And so there's things that we need to do as government in a regulatory sense, but we agreed that we would work together as business and government on how we could build out a good plan for the next 15 years or so.
Can you give some examples of more examples of the disruption they're seeing in the short term?
With respect to short term? Yeah, look, I mean, as we discussed yesterday, I mean, you can see some transport costs, depending on the sector, depending upon the goods, depending upon the source of origin, they may be up 25% moving, fuel around the world.
Is that what they're telling you?
No, but you heard, there's examples of different sectors that have different inputs around their transport costs. But again, a 25% increase in transport costs may only translate through to a 2% increase in the total price of that good that may be coming into the country. Having said that, we are getting supply. That is the main thing that we want to make sure, that goods are getting in and out of the country, and that's really reassuring.
And you wanted to talk to them about the costs. Are you starting to get a picture about the current costs that businesses are facing because of the crisis?
It's completely different by sector, it's completely different by market, and it's completely different about where source of origin is coming for input. So it's not possible to get a national aggregated picture at all around that. Suffice to say, it's a no-brainer that when you've got higher fuel costs, you've obviously got higher input costs, and that's why we've been saying we want to mitigate and minimise the impact on inflation, obviously. Well, no, it's generally different by different sectors, and but again, from day one, we've been tracking our top key critical inputs. Think about urea, think about plastics, and other petrochemical inputs into New Zealand, and we're getting good supply of that.
Prime Minister, we reported this morning that the Interislander is jacking up its surcharges on about 54% of its customers, I think, as a result of the flow through of the fuel prices. As part of your temporary targeted, and I can't remember the other T...
temporary, timely and targeted.
Temporary, timely and targeted thing. Is there any consideration being given to subsidising or helping out SOEs or Kiwi Rail or anyone like that?
Look, not at this point. I mean, again, our key piece is to really acknowledge up front we're not going to be able to alleviate the pressure on everybody. We actually are thinking about timely targeted temporary support. I acknowledge that there will be obviously higher costs coming into the supply chains, and as a result, that's why we keep saying there will be an impact on inflation, and you've seen some economists project that out for the coming quarter. The key issue, of course, that comes back, and even over the events of the last 24 hours, is to make sure that we have ceasefire negotiations and a settlement in the Hormuz Strait. That is the single biggest thing. How long this conflict goes on, whether it's escalated or not, ultimately impacts New Zealanders at home, but it also impacts 8 billion people all around the world.
And as part of your discussions and meetings that you've had over the last couple of days, have you come away Have you come away with anything new where you thought, oh yeah, I hadn't quite. There's going to be a run on cost to this sector or that industry which I hadn't quite thought about, or that just is going to be a bit bigger than you originally thought?
Look, I don't think it's just been a confirmation of what we were understanding from our situation at home. I mean, we said to you from the very beginning we wanted to learn from the mistakes of COVID. We wanted to actually work with industry, and we've done that. We've got a series of 4 or 5 engagement groups on different topics that we've been working with the companies around. And so we've had a very good picture, but it actually coming up here has been very confirming, frankly, that the refineries have actually are so vertically integrated and they've hustled so well to find alternative feedstock for crude that actually that's been quite reassuring for us in our conversation. That was a big takeaway from yesterday, for example. I think on the broader agenda, you come to Singapore, and we went through our Singapore New Zealand Leadership Forum yesterday. And again, one of the big topics is the potential of AI and actually how that can help us improve the productivity and lift our living standards at home. And we know there's a lot of work for us to do there.
The two things that you seem to come into this were around getting more information around fuel and also sort of economic investment and business opportunities. So on the second bit, do you leave here sort of confident that we're going to see more investment into New Zealand, more partnerships, and that's going to create more jobs back home, or is it a bit of a wait and see on that?
No, exactly. I mean, that's the reason why I'm to bring 30 very senior Singaporean CEOs together with 30 very senior New Zealand CEOs together, because actually it's those partnerships and those conversations that happened yesterday, and it was a very successful meeting yesterday. The report back from both sides was that there was a huge amount of value add, that they could actually see areas where they could collaborate and work together and invest together, whether that be here in Singapore or back at home. And so, when you think about the renewables boom that we've got up and running, there's a number of firms that were there yesterday that are very interested in what's happening in renewables and waste management, and those conversations have been facilitated through that, broadening out the relationship from just the Prime Minister to Prime Minister or the ministers to actually our business leaders to business leaders as well.
Have you had anyone contact you since the signing of that essential supplies agreement yesterday to say, hey, we want to have a conversation with you about it now?
No, not at this stage. It's been a pretty full 24 hours, but what you heard from Lawrence and I yesterday is, look, if people are prepared to meet the high standards and the commitment that we have to each other, that's something that we could progress and talk through. The next logical point for us to check out whether there's any interest in doing that would be obviously the future of an investment and trade partnership, which we're hosting back in New Zealand in the middle of the year.
In terms of that agreement, though, you talk about it being really crucial, particularly in this time with the Middle East crisis.
Yeah.
In the document, though, it talks about how the government can't direct private companies to do anything, that New Zealand can still put in restrictions in the case of national security. So, given those clauses, I mean, is New Zealand still exposed here to what's
Well,
happening in the
I think,
Middle East?
what we've done is not more than, other countries may have done best endeavours. We've done, a guarantee not to impose export restrictions on each other. If I think about it, it's a government-to-government arrangement. Obviously, there's a market, and you have to pay a price for securing food into Singapore and obviously fuel into New Zealand. But actually, the physical supply is what this agreement's about. With respect to other bits, it's just an acknowledgement that we need diesel from Singapore to power up our farming and production system to enable to send food back into Singapore and into the region. So it's quite a circular and interconnected supply chain that's sitting there. So no, I think we're very proud of what we've done here, and it's again we're really pushing out the boat because we really want to innovate and actually think when we've got such high trust between each other, and that's the key thing. We do genuinely have strong relationships that leads to trust, that leads to possibilities of what we can do together, and then leads to plans, it leads to better results for people.
But I guess this agreement isn't the silver bullet, is it, to protecting New Zealand during the Middle East
Well, there's
crisis?
lots of things that we have to do. We have to build more resilience at home, and that's part of the supply chain conversation we had about what more do we need to do for future crises over the next 15 years, but more importantly to build a better system in New Zealand. But equally, it's a really important step, particularly when 31% of our fuel comes from Singapore, to be able to have this arrangement in place. I've spoken to the South Korean president as well. I've also spoken, as I said, over the last week with the Prime Minister of Pakistan, who's trying to negotiate a settlement between the US and Iran. I spoke to the Sultan of Oman, the President of the UAE as well. So, we're trying to use our influence as many ways as we possibly can.
The latest on the war in the, I think, last 24 hours has been shots fired between each side. Trump has said that the hell out of Iran should they target US warships. It seems incredibly volatile. How much of a plan B do New Zealand businesses and New Zealand as a whole need to have if this escalates even further?
Well, look, I mean, all we keep doing is, the core issue is we need a de-escalation, we need the ceasefire extended, and we need a negotiated solution. And so we urge the US and Iran to get round the table and deliver that, because we've got 5 million New Zealanders that are suffering with high prices at the pump. You've got 8 billion people in many developing countries in the world that have really already got disrupted supply and don't have as robust a system or as well organised as we are in New Zealand. We've been very conscious from day one. That's why we've got a 4-phase approach. We'll talk more about that in the coming week or so.
Phase 3 and 4 coming out?
No, just in terms of, we've talked about how we would perfect our response should there be further disruption down the road. But, as I've said to you, we've got, really good reassurance that we've got, confirmed orders through to the end of May, planned orders through to June. On our critical supplies that are in and out of the country, they're in really good position. We're very fortunate that our seasonality works against the Northern Hemisphere, so we've actually got good supplies of urea and fertiliser and other critical things for food systems. So, we've been thinking about everything from day one. We've been very well organised, and we've been able to have very good engagement with lots of different sectors in the economy.
Sorry, on just that the phase 3 and 4, is that the am I getting it slightly mixed up, because there was the more details that you were...
Yeah, that's what I was referencing. In our National Fuel Response Plan, we've got 4 phases. We said that we would put more thought and definition as we've been talking to industry over the last few weeks about, heaven forbid, should we ever need to go to phase 3 and 4, and we're doing everything we can to make sure that we don't get there, and that's partly why this trip's been important. We'll put more definition to that over the next week or so.
Prime Minister, there's been really good feedback from the business delegation on the trip so far. Are you looking forward to, if this was the inaugural forum, you're looking forward to hosting one in New Zealand next year?
Yeah, look, I mean, we've left it with the co-conveners. I wanted to make sure the first time that there was value for both sides, and the playback from the Singaporean side is they got a lot of value from it, which is really excellent. So we'll work out when's the next logical time for us to be able to do that. But I hope you've got a sense, the relationship here is one that we've built. As I said, I met Prime Minister Wong before I came into Prime Ministership. We both came through as new Prime Ministers together. We've been good friends, and actually we've wanted to intuitively just build on the trust and the alignment that sits there. And then, we've encouraged our ministers now to have, set piece meetings. Chris Pink will be up here shortly for the Shangri-La Declaration and Defence meeting. That's a really important one. New Zealand's participating more than we've ever done, because we actually, are going to spend $12 billion in the next 4 years. So, we've got so many angles to this relationship now, and new things to feed it and to drive it.
Your government's made a particular diplomatic effort in Southeast Asia. I think you've travelled everywhere except Indonesia, and Winston's been just about everywhere as well. Is what we're seeing here maybe the first fruits of what's been very successful?
Look, I think, from day one, we just felt that New Zealand had lost some relevance in the world. We were so slow coming out of COVID relative to other countries. They'd all moved on. And the reality is no one owes New Zealand a living. We're a small country, and actually, India doesn't need to do an FTA with New Zealand. Southeast Asia doesn't need New Zealand in that way. And so we have actually tried to make the case for New Zealand. I think we've done that very effectively. And you've seen us upgrade to the comprehensive strategic partnerships with ASEAN. You've seen us do an investment treaty with the UAE and an FTA with the UAE and the GCC. You've seen us upgrade relationships with South Korea, defence arrangements with Japan, the Philippines. We're participating now with our P8s with respect to UN sanctions being enforced with North Korea. So there's just we're very engaged, and I think we're getting respected for that. I think we have influence. I think when I participate in things like the Hormuz Strait with the 51 other countries and am asked to talk about the position in this part of the world, that they're all good things where New Zealand's articulating our values and our interests, and then partnering with countries to have influence.
Are you guys considering sending the P8 Poseidons over to assist in the efforts in the Strait of Hormuz?
Look, there's two strands of effort at the moment. Obviously, the UK-French-led proposal, which joined us calls with 51 other countries and spoke there. And then obviously we've just in recent days received a US proposal as well, which we're seeking further information about. In all cases, what we need to see is a permanent ceasefire, and we would need to consider our position and then take that through Cabinet as to what we could do.
At this point, do you think that you will get to Indonesia before the election? Because you've tried a couple of times and it hasn't happened. So what's the plan there?
We'll see how we go. President Prabowo and I have a good relationship. We've had hour and a half meetings at different global forums, so we haven't been able to facilitate a visit there yet. We'll keep trying to make our schedules work. But we've had very, very positive engagements. Our last meeting was at APEC in Korea, and we chatted for an hour and a half. And New Zealand-Indonesia relationship's in good heart. But obviously that's the one place I do want to get to at some point.
Can I just quickly ask, on your return, the countdown is on for the budget. Your government's been pretty open about how, with the crisis, it has essentially had to be re-looked at. Where are you at? Has it been signed off yet, or is that happening in the next
Look, our budget's working through its normal budgetary process, and I'm not going to talk about it before the budget, but clearly, we as we've said from the beginning, there will be some impact on inflation and growth. Our job is to make sure we're keeping an eye on the long term and medium term for New Zealand, and that'll be revealed when we reveal the budget. Okay, team, let's get out of the glass house, eh?